Chavre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark und freilich, begashmus und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Bamidbar. Sunday, Mirza Hashem, is Rosh Chodesh Sivan. We'll start as usual with a stocket, Gil, stocket, Shemakarevis, Agula. Mashiach should come now. Now we're going to say a prayer, a pasuk from Tilim, which is going to be directly connected to the Parsha of the week, and it has a profound message which I wouldn't have thought about otherwise, and I'll tell you something that I realize now for the first time. I must confess, embarrassingly so. So the pasuk in Tilim is from Kapitel Lnedvav, pasuk Zayin, Sitkoscho Kareil, Mishpotecho Tehim Rabba, Odom of Hemo, Teshia Adinoi. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your judgments extend to the great deep. Man and animal you deliver, O Hashem. So I'm reading an English translation and commentary which he brings from Rashi. What does it mean that your righteousness is like the mighty mountains? Those upon whom you want to bestow kindness and righteousness, you raise up and strengthen like mighty mountains. And those who you wish to judge and take vengeance from, you lower them to the great deep. So over here, the Rabbeinu Bachaya, in the beginning of the Parsha, brings from a Medrash Tanchuma, a moedi dikazach. But first, let's talk about the beginning of the Parsha, the first pasuk in Parshas Bamidbar. That means the first words you hear, the first message you get. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai be'el moed be'echad lachodesh hasheni b'shana hashenes l'tzeiso me'eretz Mitzrayim leimer. Hashem is commanding them to make a census to count the Yidden. Su'u es reish kol das b'nei Yisrael. Count all the Yidden. Okay. So the pasuk over here says, and Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the second month of the second year after the exodus from Egypt. So what I never realized before was this pasuk is talking about Rosh Chodesh Iyar. We're still in the month of Iyar. That means that when we say Midav 11 the Parsha Shavua, we have to live with the message, with the Parsha of the week, and what it's telling us, the fact that this pasuk emphasizes that it was on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, that means it has a special connection to the entire month of Iyar. Just like Iyar has a special message different than other months, Rosh Chodesh Iyar is something that connects to the entire month. So today is Chof Ches, so we're still connected to the whole month. They're still connected to the Rosh Chodesh. So what is the message? So the Medrash, the Rabbeinu Bachaya brings over here in Parshas Bamidbar, connecting to this pasuk, he brings a Medrash Tanchuma, and it says as follows: V'zeu shambu b'Medrash, tzidkoscha karei keo mishpatecha tahim rabba, kishata mevit stoka ba'olam, when you're doing righteousness, miforsemasi kaharim alolu, it becomes grand, publicized, known to all, just like these mountains. Aval ha-mishpatim heim nestorim ketahim rabba, but when it comes to judgments, then the Eibishter doesn't publicize it so much. I'm not going to get into what it says before, but let's go straight to the point, connected to our pasuk. Aval kishaba legadles Yisrael, when Hashem wanted to make the Jews great, hu mefarsim es Yisrael, he mentions that the Yidden, be'eze mokoim b'midbar Sinai, be'eze yoim be'echad l'chodesh. Where did this happen? In Midbar Sinai. In what day? In the first of the month. Le'eze chodesh l'chodesh hasheni, in the second month, year. Be'eze shana, which year? B'shana hashenis, the second year. Le'eze dovel l'tzeisam eretz Mitzrayim, the second year to what? And that's how he begins the Parsha, Sidra Ben Echaya, and then he says, V'zeu shakosov, and this is what the pasuk says, V'daber Hashem el Moshe Midbar Sinai, where by el moed be'echad l'chodesh hasheni b'shana hashenis, as he said before. So in other words, We don't know what the significance to ear is on this medrash, but we do know that the fact that we go into the specifics and into the details of this pasuk, as he mentions over here, that it's be'echad l'chodesh hasheni, that's emphasizing the greatness of the Jewish people, that it's noted in great detail, and it's like a major announcement in all the headlines, CNN, ABC, New York Times, whatever it is. And we publicize it, we make it grand, we make it outstanding, like mountains. It also shows on the strength, etc. My point is that there's a medrash that takes note of the details over here, of the time, of the place, and therefore that itself is a lesson to us that when something is very, very important, very worthy, we note the time and we get into the details and the specific to make it more grand, to make it more epic, to make it more monumental. So that means that this pasuk emphasizes the awesomeness of the Jewish nation. Okay, now, in general, I spoke many times, my nature, my objective in these shurim is not to speak about things that are spoken about often and all over, because then I could just say, go take a look at the Sichas Chelik Aleph, and maybe some of my students, my target audience is my Talmidim, and if they learned by me in Yeshiva, G'dayla of Tomchei Tvimim, so they know stuff. So I choose rather to speak about places or tziches or teiros that is not so well known, and my objective is to make them more known. Yofutzu meine secha chutza, especially those things that are undiscovered. Now, we'll start with the idea of preparation and why this parsha. There's two things that are spoken about in this week's parsha. Parshas Bamidbar is always read before Shavuos. This coming Wednesday, Thursday night in Mitzvah is Shavuos, and Parshas Bamidbar is always read usually in the week before Shavuos or right before that. So what is the connection between Parshas Bamidbar and the holiday of Shavuos? Sunday is Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Everyone knows in the end of Hilchos Pesach, Siman Tov Tzadik Daled, the Alter Rebbe brings that Miyad Achar Rosh Chodesh, immediately from Rosh Chodesh Sivan, his Chil Moshe L'Snasei Kimoyim Be'inyin Kabbalah Satera. Moshe Rabbeinu began occupying himself with the nation to receive the Torah. Shebesheni b'Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, Ubeshlishi b'Shabbos Amalem Batim Tilim Amlachas Kohanim. On the second day of Sivan, he told them Batim Tilim Amlachas Kohanim. V'Goymer B'vi Amalem Mitzvahs Hagbala, the Shloshim Hagbala, 3 days of boundaries and borders. Yisham Lechem Aleis Bahar. Be careful not to ascend the mountain. B'Chamishi Amalem Mitzvahs Prisha. Sheifshu Min Shisayim Hayoyim U'Machar. They had to separate from their wives. That's the end of the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Pesach. As we know, when it comes to Jewish holidays, we don't just celebrate events which took place long ago, but as the Rebbe brought down all the time from the Arizal, Hayom Me'elu Niskarim V'Nasim means that these days, not only we recall events that took place a long, long time ago, but if you're there Niskarim, if you plug in properly, if you connect properly, you experience it properly, you remember them properly, Niskarim V'Nasim, they're reactivated. It's happening now. I don't want to get into it now. There's connection to so many things. There's a famous Torah of the Alter Rebbe connected to the Aseret Sadibres. I'm sure I mentioned before the famous question, why did it say Leimar? Everyone was there. Usually it says Leimar when the Eibush spoke to Moshe and told Moshe Leimar to tell it over to the Yidden. Why does it say over here Leimar by the Aseret Sadibres? The Alter Rebbe gives an unbelievable pshat. Leimar means that it's on repeat. What does it mean it's on repeat? The experience of Sinai forever is repeated whenever a Jew learns Torah. All these things that Hashem spoke were spoken in a status, in a mode of Leimar. They can be repeated. You can have, in essence, every single time when the Jew is learning Torah, it's like the giving of the Torah at Sinai. So I'm saying the same things over here. Every time a Jew experiences a Yom Tif, it's literally the greatest of the great. We're going to receive the Torah once again anew this coming Thursday night, Thursday morning. And Mr. Hashem, I hope to make another video on Thursday with Hashem's help, Bezras Baruch. But in any case, so that means, if then, in preparing ourselves for Matan Torah, so too we have to start preparing ourselves for Shuas for Matan Torah. So, the two most obvious questions on this week's Parsha, which is discussed all over, is what's the connection with Bamidbar and Shavuos, and why does the Torah emphasize in the pasuk over here that the Eibishter spoke to the Yidden Bamidbar, in a desert? This whole Chumash is called Bamidbar, even though the English name is called Numbers because it talks about the census, but the way we call it is Bamidbar, and Bamidbar means the desert. What significance is there that the entire book should be called Desert? And why does the pasuk emphasize that he spoke to the Yidden Bamidbar? And this is connected to the famous old question of all time. You'd think the Torah should have been given in Eretz Yisrael. If the whole objective of Yetzias Mitzrayim was to come to Matan Torah, and the whole thing, we had to count down the 49s to be yearning for it, the Eibishter could have made a different system. We could have counted down 50 days, whatever, and gotten into Eretz Yisrael. The distance between Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael is not so far. It's only because of side things that went wrong that we had to be there for 40 years. But in any case, you'd think Torah is the holiest of the holies. Let the holiest of the holies have the most appropriate worthiness of a place where it resides. Like in a shul, it's in the Aron. So too the place should have been a place of beauty, a garden, something that shows on value. So this is a very famous question, which is discussed in many, many places. So, before we get to that, I want to repeat something that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, but I actually didn't repeat it because we didn't have enough time, so I'm going to say it now because I think it's so important and I never heard people speak about it. The Rebbe in 1956 said that the Friedrich Rebbe 20 years before that, in 1936, said a Torah. And what Torah did he say? He said a Torah that the Baal Shem Tov said to, when the first Torah that the Maggid heard from the Baal Shem Tov, and with this he grabs the Maggid, he grabbed the Maggid, and then the Maggid said this Torah to the Alter Rebbe, grabbed the Alter Rebbe, and then the Alter Rebbe said it when he wanted to bring the Mittel Rebbe into a new level. This is a Sikha of the Friedrich Rebbe, Tofresh Tzadik Vov. So I'm going to read to you inside how the Torah goes. See there in the old print it's page 144, and the new print it's 156. The second day of Shavuos, Tofresh Tzadik Vov. And this is the Torah. We spoke about it, I think 2 videos ago. But I didn't get into the Torah itself, but I took a different point from this pasuk. But it's connected to what I'm going to say now. Hashem says these are the holidays. Mikroi Kodesh. We spoke in the video 2 weeks ago that Mikroi Kodesh means that Hashem is calling the Yidden to holiness. Or Mikroi Kodesh, Asher Tikra Oisa B'Vay Adam, that the Yidden create the status through Bezdin. See Rashi over there. But let me just read inside what the Torah was that the Baal Shem Tov said. The holidays are called Mikroi Kodesh. What does that mean? The Baal Shem Tov learned that it means that we draw them out, the Jews. In Torah. The holidays were designated by Hashem in the Torah. And the Torah precedes the world by 2,000 years. We can't explain all these concepts now, but please listen to the Torah. So the holidays are in the Torah, and the Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years. The holidays were waiting for 2,000 years for the Jewish nation to come along and for Matan Torah. And that's what it means, Mikroi Kodesh, Shemamshichim Kodesh Elyon. We, the Yidden, draw down the supernal holiness. Medaf Mamshel Zayin Dem Kodesh Elyon. We Yidden have to bring it down. Asher Tikra Isam B'Moyadam. How do we draw it down properly? Al Yidei HaChoneh shekoidim hamoyed, through preparing ourselves before the holiday. And over here the Friedrich Rebbe goes into a paragraph. I'll just read some snippets. He says, Amol given by Eden Kentek Shabbos. It used to be when you look at somebody, you could tell that it was Shabbos. When you saw Yontiv, you saw the Simcha, the Jew's face, the Yid's face was shining, illuminating. The week was a different week because it was influenced by the Shabbos and the Yontiv. Mat gewart. We waited. People were yearning. Bald wird sein Shabbos and bald wird sein Yontiv. Soon it's going to be Shabbos and soon it's going to be Yontiv. Ist es loy dai for Shabbos and Yontiv sind mashpi in der Woche. Now it's bad enough that the Shabbos and the Yontiv is not influenced in the week. Werter noch mushpa von der Woche. It becomes impacted from the week, from mundaneness. If you're sitting Shabbos by the table and you're talking about shtusim, the latest sports or politics, that means that your Shabbos table has become invaded with mundaneness. And he says, that's because of the coarseness. And we see over there. So in other words, in the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov was this idea of achana, preparing for the Yontif. And this Torah was said by the Baal Shem Tov to the Maggid, etc., etc., as we said before. The Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe said it in 1936, the Rebbe repeated in 1956. See also the Sikh of the Rebbe, the second day Shavuos, 1956, where he talks about the idea of achana, which we're going to talk about it today a bit. Two hachanas we're going to talk about. The Rebbe in the Sikha says that, of course there has to be achana because you're living one world, one life, on one planet. Let's say, for example, you have a job on Wall Street, or Collins Street, or a Adair Drive. It's the world of, I don't know what, whatever it is, business, physicality, materialism. Now you want to connect to spirituality. It doesn't work just by just pressing a button. The Rebbe says, of course, there's sometimes exception to the rule, but usually the rule is you have to prepare yourself. You have to make yourself a conduit. You have to make yourself a vehicle to be able to receive that dosage of spirituality. It's a combination, as we spoke in the other shit 2 weeks ago, but there's got to be some preparation on your part. So, first of all, let's talk about the answer of Bamidbar, which I believe is one of the most important things, one of the most important messages. I'm going to speak about two things which I personally believe and which I find are the two, I would say, maybe the most important rules for spiritual development, and why many people feel that they weren't touched by spirituality or it's not working, etc. So the number one rule is what the Medrash says. Why was the Torah given Bamidbar? And the answer is, the Medrash says, I forgot the Lashon, I wrote it down somewhere, I lost the page. The Medrash says, Lama nitna Torah Bamidbar, because you have to mefana atzmai, you have to empty yourself from everything. Just like a midbar is an empty space. It's an empty land. There's nothing there. There's many, many other reasons, which we spoke about many, many other times. Right now, I want to focus on one thing. Similar to what it says, Kli reikon machzik. An empty mind could receive. Now, what does that mean? That means right now, you want to get influenced by spirituality or not? You know, I heard a word from the Lendel that somebody comes to a Chassidic Farbrengen and he's busy learning something else, a Rambam, Mochitas, while he's by this Farbrengen, by this Chassidic gathering. I heard the Mendel would say, you didn't accomplish the Rambam and you didn't accomplish the Chassidic Farbrengen. You're not here and you're not there. If you want something to hit you properly, you got to be in it, focus, pay attention. And it means there's two aspects to it. The first thing is be receptive. Be enough open-minded that you're giving it a serious chance. And that's what it means. the first chapter we're talking about now, about Masa Matzmei Kamidbar, make yourself like a desert. Empty yourself from everything else. There's no houses, there's no businesses, there's no sights. You're not going on an interesting hike over here, you're not going sightseeing. There's nothing. Only the word of Hashem. Focus on it and absorb it, digest it, internalize it, let it hit the spot. And the only way that happens properly is if the Torah is given in a desert. There's no side distractions whatsoever. Today we're always talking about the age of distractions and devices, etc., etc. Look how Torah is so unbelievable. I love Torah. How Torah preempted so many things and so many problems that are so current. And here comes the message. The reason why the Torah was given in the Midbar is that there should be no distractions and you should be totally focused on that alone. And that's the only way. Kli Reikar Machzik. And a lot of, they say an expression, it takes a lot of faith to be an atheist. Why? Because you would actually be a bit open-minded and really give it a chance. Then you would see the truth. Yeah, now someone's going to tell me, that's what you say. Thank you. And the Rebbe explains this also, if I remember correctly, similarly, when he talked about the difference in chometz and matzah. What's the difference in chometz and matzah? It's the same letters, but the chometz has a ches, and matzah has a hey. What's the difference? A hey has an opening on top. There's a window. Hello. There could be something greater than you. There could be something infinitely greater than you. Try to fathom that. And that's what it's all about. And that's how we get the Torah. That's the first step to make the proper preparation to the Torah, is that we're dealing with godly wisdom. Open up your mind to it and open up your mind totally to it and empty yourself from other preconceived notions or agendas. Try that and see what happens. And this is also connected. I'm sure I've spoken about these things many times because I just love it. In Perek Gimel of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about das. And he says clearly a person can have chachma and bina. I can't elaborate now, the time is running. But you could be talented with your IQ in different departments. One is chachma, one is bina, it's different intellectual faculties and capacities. But das means the commitment. Attach yourself solidly, thoroughly, and that's going to make all the difference. And the Lashon the Alter Rebbe says over here, you must read these words, and I say this to people, again, who say they've got involved in the spiritual lifestyle, but they don't see it, it's not working, it's not happening. The answer is, again, read these words over here, the Alter Rebbe, in chapter 3, and then I'm asking you a question, did you do this, what it says here? This is the manual. Did you or didn't you? If you did it, then we could talk. If you didn't do it, try this first. What does the Alter Rebbe say in Perek Gimel? The Alter Rebbe says that what's das? His kashrus, bonding. Shemekasher daitoi bekesher omitz v'chozak ma'oid. V'yitke machshavtoi b'choizik. V'eina mesir daitoi. And lady says again, V'yitke machshavtoi b'choizik u'ba'asmoda. So there's two things over here. There's bekamus, quantitatively speaking, and be'echas, qualitatively speaking. What I mean to say is, first of all, qualitatively speaking, you have to attach yourself an intense fixation of thought. That's one thing. And then quantitatively, ve'ena masir daitoi, without losing concentration. And the same thing when he says before, b'chayzik u'ba'asmoda, he says focus your mind with intensity and consistency. Listen, my friends. Intensity means you're all in. Nothing else exists. Consistency means that it has to be for a while. I say the same thing, I forgot which day, where it says in you have to soak in the words of the master. And he compares that to Malicha. So when we speak about Malicha, there's a certain amount, there's a certain time frame of how long Malicha has to take. It doesn't happen automatically. And if it's less than that time, it didn't accomplish what it's meant to accomplish. What's Malicha? Malicha means that there's a piece of meat that has blood in it, and it has to soak in salt water in order for the blood to come out. There's a time in Shulchan Aruch, I forgot right now what the amount of time is, but let's say, for example, it's 20 minutes. If you do it less than 20 minutes, it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. Now the same thing's over here. The Yitke machshavte bechoizik ubahasmode. Bechoizik means, qualitatively speaking, you're all in. And ubahasmode means you have to be there. It takes a certain amount of time. It's not automatic. That's what we're talking about. Achana. So right till now we spoke about two things. Number one, empty yourself completely. Be open-minded. Be really, really receptive. To be really receptive, you have to go to without any preconceived notions. And the second thing, like it says, make yourself like a midbar. And the second thing we said, you need to really apply yourself in a way of das, as the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 3. Now I want to speak about one more thing. There's a Maimer of the Rebbe, Svartim Lechem Tavshin Yud Aleph, where he says something very, very interesting. He says, like Bamidbar comes before Shavuos. You think to yourself, in the history, the chronological order, of course, first was Matan Torah, and then I don't know how many years later, 1,000+ years later, was the story of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. But in the calendar, the yearly cycle, the sequences, first comes like Bamidbar on Chai Ir, the 18th of Iyar, then comes Matan Torah Shavuos on Vav Sivan. And the Rebbe explains that the reason why Lag Bamidbar has to come before Shavuos is because we have to go to Shavuos properly. I'm sure we spoke about this many times, about the concept of Baruch Hu B'Torah Tchila. You have to, the whole idea of why Birchas HaTorah, we say the blessings to learn Torah, and there was a plague because they didn't do that. I'm not going to elaborate now because I'm sure we spoke about it other times. But the Rebbe explains the spirit of the inner dimension of Torah has to be injected and internalized, infusing us before Matan Torah. So therefore our whole approach to receiving the Torah and learning the Torah will be proper. Basically, are we looking at the Torah as laws and restrictions and regulations and a guide for man? Or are we talking about the Torah is godliness, it's God Himself, which He gave us a Torah, which through that Torah we entered into the deepest, most intimate relationship with Hashem. What's Matan Torah? Hashem's wedding, where we got married to Hashem. It makes a world of a difference every single second you're learning Torah, and especially in the concept, like the Alter Rebbe mentioned when he speaks about the idea of Lamar, it's a repeat. Every single time we're learning Torah, it's the Sinai experience, and therefore you go to it with a whole different reverence. Wow! And therefore, of course, it wouldn't be possible to say it doesn't make sense if you don't understand something in Torah. I don't understand, etc., etc. So therefore, like Bamidbar has to come before Shavuos, because if you don't have the right approach, if you don't have the right attitude, it's going to be catastrophic. You must have the right attitude to limit that Torah and to learn Torah. The only example I can give to this, and I probably spoke about this once before, is that the Chabad custom is that we learn the Aleph Beis. You know, on the day when the kid goes to Cheder, the Chabad custom is that we learn the Aleph Beis, that the teacher points to the Aleph in the Shabbat from Tanya. Even though most of the world points to the Aleph the way it's in an Aleph Beis chart, by Chabad Chassidim the custom is, and I don't exactly know when it started, but I'm sure it started who knows when, that we point to the Aleph Beis in the first title page of the Tanya. And the Rebbe explains, because even though technically, chronologically, literally, one doesn't really start learning Chassidus until he's like 13, as the Mishnah says, Ben Chomish Lemikra, Ben Esel Mishnah, but the spirit of Chassidus, the spirit of the inner dimension of Torah, which is the idea of godliness in a revealed way, how spirituality dominates, that has to be injected into the child even before he starts learning Nigla Torah. So the spirit of Pnimius HaTorah, that the Torah is Hashem Himself, is immediately transmitted, injected to the child immediately. And the same thing's over here. So that's a third point I'm speaking to you today about the Hachana to Shavuos, that we have to start understanding or appreciating in our mind the awesomeness, the beauty, the infinity, the profundity of what the Torah is. And And the more we learn in Chassidus what the Torah is, the more we get excited about the Torah, the more we enjoy learning Torah, and the more Torah puts us on a high, which is unbelievable. So, Good Shabbos, posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne, and to finish with just one more sentence, even though this is another thing I want to talk about a lot, is when it comes to counting, the verse says, Su'u es reish, raise the heads, pick up the heads, lift up the heads. So all the commentaries speak about it. There's many words to use for counting. What's the idea of lift up your head? And I'm mentioning this now over here because I think this is the sachakel, the conclusion. And I've said many times, there's sometimes solutions, eitzes, that advice that Chassidus gives, Mashpiyim give. It sounds simple, but that is the answer. And it's like, Shtel zich hecher, rise above it. Ligen hechel in yonim, immerse yourself in higher things. Like, take the high road. Su'es reish, lift up your head. And when you lift up your head and you put yourself in a different sort of situation, a different mind space, a different perspective, then all of a sudden everything changes. And this is what we have to start doing from Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Let's get involved, put our brain space and our head space in a higher consciousness, and that will be the proper preparation for Matan Torah, and we'll make more and more resolutions to increase in our learning in Torah, especially in the way of Das, quantitatively and qualitatively, and we'll see unbelievable greater results. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.